Welcome to the Horror Screens podcast, an extension of the Horror Screens Video Vault website. I am your host, Peter, alongside Stephen, who's going to say hello now.
Hello.
That's all he's got to say today.
Thank you.
Yep. This is episode 5, Stephen. Can you believe we're 5 episodes in already?
Wow, 5 episodes in. That's unbelievable, isn't it? God blimey. We've got 5 million listeners and viewers and things.
Oh, well, my statistics things looks a little wrong. My zeros are in the wrong place. Okay. Yeah, okay. That's fine then. Yeah, good.
Yeah, nice.
So before I guess we mention anything else, we should let people know that we're actually on Apple Podcast as well now.
Yay!
So, yes, we finally got there. We've cracked the tough nut.
Ooh.
Yep, that one. So, Stephen, what do you think we're going to talk about today?
Well, on tonight's show, we're going to be talking about our recently seen, of course, which will involve us talking about our recently seen. Then we're going to be talking about Herschel Gordon Lewis's The Gorgor Girls, which is a classic entry for retro rewind. Holy Moses. And then we're going to be talking about women. Women in horror.
But mainly women.
Women.
In horror.
Women in horror. Yes, so all of those things and more, or possibly less, in the next 2 hours.
Plus.
More than.
Yeah.
Which I guess you covered with plus.
Yeah, we're trying to get it down to 2 hours eventually, somewhere along the line. But yeah. So, one of my recently seen things, I went to the Cinema Museum in London to go watch 2 films starring Todd Slaughter, which, if people don't know, was really considered the first British horror star, as in born in this country and actually did the films in this country, as opposed to being born here and then going to a different country and making films. So the 2 films that were shown there was Crimes at the Dark House, which involves a madman who kills a guy in Australia, I think it is, and then he takes on his persona and impersonates him so he can take on his large estate and obviously get lots of money. But what he doesn't realize is that the person he killed off is also in a lot of debt, so he's not actually going to gain anything from it. So there was that, and that's from 1940. And the other one that was shown was The Face at the Window, which was previous year, 1939, which I think it's set in France, Victorian France time. And it's about a bunch of murders involving the so-called Wolfman. There isn't actually a werewolf or Wolfman type thing, but there's an extra character in the film, put it that way. There's an extra character in the film you don't actually get to see anything about until the last 5-10 minutes of the film. But I would say about Todd Slaughter, I always found this funny watching sort of people coming from either from stage and then going straight into film when film was first coming out, is you could tell that they're still in that theatre stage play mode. Yeah. So when they're acting, they're obviously trying to act to an audience, which the audience obviously isn't there because they're doing a film. So a lot of his facial expressions are obviously done as if it was done for a stage play, but they're entertaining. And the book that was there that you could pick up was Mr. Murder, The Life and Times by Todd Slaughter, which is done by Dennis Mickle, Kip Zoll, and Doug Young, which is actually quite an interesting book if you fancied picking up, whether you wanted to find out anything about Todd Slaughter, if you know anything about him or not. But it's available on hemlockbooks.co.uk and Amazon, I believe, and probably other book places. But cool. It's an interesting book. Do you know anything about Todd Slaughter?
A little, yeah, and it's worth saying that Dennis Meikle, is that his name, Dennis Meikle? Yeah, Dennis Meikle, does some really good retro pieces for the Dark Side magazine. His columns in the Dark Side are usually the thing that I remember kind of enjoying the most because they're really detailed. He's quite funny. Yeah. He's a bit grumpy at times, but I think it's often warranted, and he does love the stuff that he loves. And the Hemlock books are always really good, so that's worth checking out. Todd Slaughter, I haven't seen any Todd Slaughter films for a long time. But as you said, he's kind of a rarity because whereas Karloff and people like Cushing and Lee kind of crossed over a bit. Of course, Cushing and Lee still made Hammer films in England, but Karloff went to Hollywood really soon, as soon as he got famous, really.
Yeah.
Todd Slaughter made these really grotty, kind of grimy, theatrical horror movies in Britain.
Which
they're quite fun. I've definitely seen Face at the Window, but I've also seen one called, is it Mariah Martin and the Red Barn?
That sounds familiar.
I think I saw that because randomly when I went to UEA, University of East Anglia. Yes, that's right. Yes, University of East Anglia.
Yes, you're right. Just double check. It was Mariah Martin. I was trying to think of another one he was in, and it was Spring Hill Jack was another one that he was in.
Oh, and the Demon Barber of Fleet Street.
Yeah. But yes.
You, isn't there?
Go on, talk about your university days.
Yeah, well, while I was there. It really wasn't. I mean, I turned up to some of them. While I was at the University of East Anglia, we did a course on like British films, and the stuff that was most interesting was like the mad 1930s stuff. And one of the things they picked was Mariah Martin at the Red Barn. Some of the other stuff was really boring, but and I think there's a really good early Hitchcock film called The Lodger from the 20s. But the one I remember the most was the Todd Slaughter film, and that's probably the last time I watched any Todd Slaughter film, actually.
The prints that were there, obviously, probably still on the film reels as far as I could tell. Yeah. But it's surprising that nobody's really thought of, considering all these filmmakers from past times. You've had like Andy Milligan and say Herschel Gordon Lewis and other people like that. They've had their films restored and everything. So it's kind of surprising that Todd Slaughter films haven't been picked up by somebody to be, whether it's like Eureka or Criterion, to be just touched up. I mean, yes, it would probably be hard to get hold of all the like film cells and everything else for it, but there's obviously a market there, because obviously why would they do a book on it?
Well, I'm guessing that's the case, right? I'm guessing that either the cost to restore them to be good enough for Blu-ray, which seems to be the what the collectors are crying out for, and DVD's not good enough anymore. I suppose the costs involved, even though there's enough interest to justify, but maybe the costs involved in a Blu-ray restoration are just not viable. But who knows? I'd be shocked if like they never come out in some kind of nice plush new edition.
But yeah, the two that I watched are definitely two that I would watch again anyway. But yeah, so that was a good event. And another film I watched was a film called A Lady World, which I'd say it's very arty. It's about I think it's 8 teenage girls trapped in a endless birthday party, pretty much. Basically, they're trapped in a building that I think there's been a power cut and an earthquake, so all the land around them's collapsed and they can't escape. So it becomes a bit like Lord of the Flies. One person wants to take control of everything, and they set their own little groups up and everything. But it's interesting. But don't worry, you probably get to see it sometime.
What's the movie called? Sorry.
Lady World.
Lady World. We've been there together once. Oh, that was something else. Which
is actually, considering this is going to be about women in horror later, this film was done by Amanda Kramer.
Oh, okay.
So there you go.
I would watch it. It sounds interesting.
There's a few other films I mentioned, but I'll let you take the lead for a minute.
Sure. Yeah, so I've been to the old cinema a few times this month, and there's been some interesting films out. I watched the newest version of The Grudge.
Was it any good?
Actually, yes. This is Grudge 2020, not to be confused with the 76 other Grudge films that you've already seen or not. This was interesting because it's directed by Nicholas Pesce, or Pesh, I'm not quite sure how to say his name. And he's made some cool films like Piercing, which is on Netflix, and a particularly good film that I've just forgotten the title for, but it will come back to me, so bear with me. And
I'm glad it was that good.
Hang on a minute. No, it's gone, which is really embarrassing. Anyway, the new Grudge is really good. Well, it's really good. Maybe it's an exaggeration, but it's much better than you might imagine. It's got a good cast. It's got people like William Sadler in it, who I haven't seen for a while on films. There was a time when he was in everything, including death in Bill and Ted. Bill and Ted's Bogus Journey. And, of course, the villain in Die Hard 2. And he's really good. Everybody's really good in The Grudge. There's moments that you think, no, here it is again.
I mean, the hair in the shower thing.
Yeah, and in fact, the worst thing about this film is the trailer, because the trailer shows all the worst bits. And all the worst bits are the bits that obviously the Hollywood studio said, right, we need one of these, one of those, and one of them. And the film itself is this really downbeat film about senility and suicide, assisted suicide, and mutilation and death. And it's 5 separate stories from different time frames, all chopped up, and they all kind of make sense in the end, and all linked to one house. The connection to the Grudge films, as in the Japanese Grudge films and mythology, is pretty slim. So it's really just a film that just happens to be about a curse, and the film's called The Grudge. And it's just really well done. There's some genuinely creepy stuff, and the ending is in particular really impressive, given that, again, this is a mainstream Hollywood film. So it actually is worth watching. It's not great, but it's the best Grudge film since the good one. Yeah, it's been a while. It's probably the best Grudge film since the original Japanese ones, although I think the first Grudge remake was okay with Sarah Michelle Gellar.
Yeah, I remember the first one being okay, but
yeah, and this has also got an R rating, whereas the others were PG-13, so this is a bit nastier.
Oh.
And the guy that made it is a guy that's made some nasty film. And I've just remembered the name of his film debut, which was Eyes of My Mother, which is really good. And
I remembered it ages ago, but I thought I'll wait until you finished.
The torture of trying to remember.
Maybe he'll remember it before he's finished. But
dementia. Yeah. So The Grudge, it's been poo-pooed, which is fashionable to do with anything that's the 76th remake or sequel, but it's much better than you might think. And the trailer is a shower of shite, so don't let the trailer put you off.
Okay. Anything else?
Other stuff I've watched at the cinema, stuff that's really linked to horror, is Robert Eggers' new film, The Lighthouse. So if you're a fan of The Witch, he's the guy that made it. And The Lighthouse is this, I suppose you could call it an art house horror film. It's about 2 men in a lighthouse, played by Willem Dafoe.
I'm sold.
Yes, see you in the queue. Played by Willem Dafoe and Robert Pattinson.
The Lighthouse is played by Willem Dafoe and Robert Pattinson?
Yeah, they're like a pantomime horse, but as a lighthouse. Guess who's got the back end?
Not Robert Pattinson again.
Yeah, always. Like a school. And yeah, The Lighthouse is brilliant. If you like The Witch, I think there's a good chance you'll like The Lighthouse. It's similar in the sense that it's a period piece, so it's set in the 19th century. It's very atmospheric. It's got constant howling wind and creaking doors. You feel like you're in the lighthouse with them for all 19 years or however long it is the film takes place. Yes, it does feel that long. It's in black and white, and it's very tall because it was shot in an aspect ratio that's almost square, 1 to 119 basically. So it's shot in the ratio they used to shoot silent films in, and it's shot in the ratio from 19th century photography. But the film is much more fun than probably the wanky reviews make it sound. It's really atmospheric. It's got loads of kind of black humor, and it's got the maddest masturbation sequence I've ever seen.
You haven't been on Pornhub, have you?
Oh, hang on. I'll do that now. Oh my God, I take that back. And it's also got a lot of horror imagery. So it's got like a Lovecraftian tentacle thing. It's got this creepy mermaid. It's got Edgar Allan Poe stuff. And it's basically, you could equate it, I suppose, to The Shining is maybe an obvious thing, but it's a film about cabin fever. It's about these 2 guys, a young one and an old one. And they spend the time getting drunk, insulting each other. There's one point where you think they might kiss because they're just trapped in the lighthouse for so long. And they ultimately go absolutely batshit mad. So it's a story about being trapped in a small space for a long time. And the cool thing is they actually created a 70-foot lighthouse for the movie. So I think any buildings you see in the film were constructed. And you can tell because it feels like a real thing. And the dialogue is all authentic 19th century language based on from what I can understand, based on the journals of real people that were responsible for keeping the lighthouses on their own for a long stretch of time. So The Lighthouse, even if you're put off by the reviews that say, chin stroking reviews, really interesting film, it's actually really good.
Well, a couple of other ones. I'll just have a quick spill for these ones. So I've watched a load of films that were shown, short films that were shown at the would have been last year's Toronto After Dark Film Festival. So there was Peel, which has that thing of that horrid thing that people always suspect when you buy fruit from a supermarket. Potentially you pick up a banana and then some insect bursts out of it like a spider or something. So it has that. Dark Before Dawn, which is a kind of dystopian TV, well, it's a web series thing, so would have seen the last part of it, but I am interested in watching the rest of it. So that is on YouTube. You want to watch Dark Before Dawn. The Changeling is a story of a mother getting called back by the babysitter about being alarmed by her child changing, maybe, possibly. I don't know. Yeah. You had to watch the film. Another one was Eli and Dama. I don't know if that's actually how you pronounce it. That's two girls in the middle of nowhere, snowy land. No, it's not The Shining, before somebody mentions The Shining, just because it's got snow in it. And another one was Eyes Open, which is kind of odd. It just basically is a tree with eyes on it. That's the gist of it. Anything you want to fill in on any of those?
I remember watching a lot of the Toronto short films that you sent me, which were a huge amount of really good ones. And The Changeling was a really creepy one. And Eyes Open is completely mad. The description doesn't even do it justice because it's totally mad.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of a way of putting it, but it's basically there's a woman. It's a tree which has eyes on it. Yeah.
The trees have eyes.
Yeah, and so that's the short films, and some feature films I've watched was The Last Ones, which this was the re-edit of it, and it's a film that was done about 2012, so I don't know what they cut out of it for this new edit of it, but that's following a couple of guys who one gets trapped in a shed, gets pushed in by the other guy, and he gets told that there's a virus outside and everybody's turned into zombies. But later on, you discover that maybe everything he's saying is not quite right when somebody else turns up and says everything's okay. It's if you think it's going to be a zombie film straight off the bat, then you'll probably be disappointed in it. But if you look at it in like a psychological element of it, it's quite a good film. I quite enjoyed it. It's shot in black and white, so there was that. The Church, which stars Bill Moseley. Yes, he's actually in it, not a brief 5 minutes, hey, I met you at a film festival. He plays a pastor in a church. So the church is going to apparently be sold for some new neighborhood gentrification type thing, but the church itself has other ideas because the spirits inside come out and start haunting everybody. And it has Clint Howard in it from Evil Speak.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, you say, oh, wow, but he doesn't do a lot in it. He doesn't talk. He's literally just there pulling funny faces, and that's about it. It's not something I'd rewatch again. I mean, it's not like Michael Savavi's The Church, which is one I would watch again. Daniel Isn't Real, which is really good if you haven't watched it yet. I'm guessing not.
Oh, sorry. Satellite delay. No, I haven't quite watched it yet. No, sorry, I haven't.
Well, I won't say too much about it, but I'll just say the best way I've described it to people without trying to give it away too much is it's a fucked up Drop Dead Fred, if you've ever seen Drop Dead Fred. So, and it's done by Adam Egypt Mortimer, who done Some Kind of Hate, which I didn't particularly like, but this one I did actually like. I watched Dustin Ferguson's Meat Hook Massacre Part 6, though it is a lie, it's not him that does it. Yes, he's done 6 of them. And surprisingly, they've all been done in such a short time. They've all been done within, a bit like the first 6 Friday the 13th films, they've been done in such a short period of time. So it's like a 6-year space, basically a film per year. This one was done by Jeremiah Douglas, but the series films are done by Dustin Ferguson. But I thought that one was really good, though I've only seen the first, second. I think I've seen the 6th one, but I haven't seen the other ones. But they've been quite good. They're sort of indie horror things, so if you're not into indie horror, you're missing out. And if you're just watching Hollywood horror films, you're definitely missing out because there's a lot of stuff out in the independent market you should watch. And finally is a film we're going to talk about in a moment, briefly, is The Werewolf versus the Vampire Woman, which stars Paul Naschy, who most people would know as Waldemar Daninsky, the werewolf in a hell of a lot of werewolf films from the 70s, 60s, 70s, early 80s. So yeah, that's what I've been watching. But that film was done for the Spotlight on Horror book, which I've done some writing for, and you've done some writing for. And which ones have you done writing for?
The book, a bunch of them. Recently, I've just been wrapping up. He's Eric McNaughton, who is the creator of this book that's coming out. I think he's planning to publish it in April, which is quite soon, actually.
Yes, it's April, and he had a list of films that still needs to be done, and I was looking at him and going, I've got lots of stuff to do myself. Should I take another one on? And I decided against it. Yeah. But
it's like that, isn't it? It's
but yeah, I've mine's been sent in, and I don't know if it's been looked at yet. But Werewolf vs. the Vampire Woman's mine. But I did see that you've done quite a few, or you selected quite a few. Which ones have you selected?
Yeah, I did a bunch in the early days of the project, which now seems like a long time ago. But like you said, he's published a list of things that haven't been covered. So I ambitiously offered to do a few. I've got one more to do. I've been doing it in like my lunch hour at work and stuff, and early in the morning. But I've got one more to do, which is Innocent Blood, which I need to rewatch first. But just recently, I've watched Exorcist 3. That was one of the ones that I covered for the book. Mm-hmm. So again, quite ambitiously, I thought, well, I want to do this properly, so I'm going to watch both versions and the extras, and it actually gave me all new love for Exorcist 3, which I always liked a lot. But when you get to watch, as I'm sure you probably have or are going to, when you get to watch the original version that came out, and then the Legion cut, which is the director's version that he preferred, which it was always going to be that film, you do have a new appreciation for it, I think. It's a really good film. It's a really great sequel.
I've always liked Exorcist 3. Exorcist 2 has its moments, but obviously,
it really does. Yeah.
If you look at them as probably 5 of them altogether, really.
Yes.
What's the other ones 2 called?
Repossessed. That's a joke. Exorcist, the beginning, and Dominion. Yeah.
Yeah. So if I put them in order, it'd obviously be the first one, the third one, maybe the fifth one.
Yeah.
Second film, then the fourth film. If you put it in that order, that's how I'd put it. But
yeah,
we all got our own opinions.
Sure. And yeah, they're all interesting. Like number 2 was famously dismissed by what seemed to be everybody. It was so unliked, and it failed commercially. But it's totally mad. Again, it's this film, the sequel to the biggest horror film of all time. They went totally ape with it. They made something that didn't give anyone what they liked from the first one, and just went off on its own mad tangent with, was it James Earl Jones that rides on a locust?
Yep.
Richard Burton, being Richard Burton. It's totally, absolutely insane, but also interesting because at least they didn't just repeat the stuff from the first one, because we've already seen the first one. We don't need to have the same old stuff. But number 3, holds up really well. And in any version, it still has 2 of the greatest scares of all time. And if you've watched the film, you'll know exactly what 2 moments they are in the film. They still hold up.
So, have you watched anything else that's either going to be done for this book, or just in general, you've watched anything leading up to this podcast?
Sure, yeah. I watched, also for the book for Eric, I watched Cabin in the Woods, which I always liked, and which, again, if anything, seems even better now. The thing I like about Cabin in the Woods is that it is a pastiche. It's it's not a spoof. It plays the horror stuff straight. It has an amazing sequence where all the monsters get loose in the huge control room, which is almost like that scene you always hoped would be in any film where there was more than one monster. Your vision when you were 7 of House of Dracula would that there'd be a massive massacre halfway through, which of course never happens. But in Cabin in the Woods, it kind of does. And the good thing about Cabin in the Woods, I think, is that it clearly has a lot of affection for horror. So even if it's doing that kind of slightly sarcastic thing of commenting on horror films, it's not like Scream, where you get the impression that actually deep down the writer of Scream probably doesn't actually like horror that much. Whereas the people that made Cabin in the Woods, you think, yeah, they love this stuff as much as me. Mm-hmm. So that was good. I rewatched Don't Look Now, just because I wanted to. And it had a new, and it had a new edition, remastered in 26K or something that came out last year. And Don't Look Now is another favorite. A really good film. Watching it again, you realize how good it is. It's one of those things you almost take for granted, but it's got that amazing sequence at the start where Donald Sutherland's daughter drowns in the pond, and it's all a kind of really dread-filled tale that is just leading to the moment at the very end where you think, "Oh God, really?" And the whole thing makes sense when you get to the end moment. And I watched a really good film called The Girl on the Third Floor.
Oh, with CM Punk.
Yeah, him.
Phil Brooks, as he's known now, but yeah, he's a former wrestler.
Oh, you see, I didn't know that, so that's interesting. I wonder why he had two names. I could have guessed, I suppose.
Yeah, CM Punk. CM Punk was his wrestling name. So
what was his real name again?
Phil Brooks.
Phil Brooks.
Yeah,
that's much more terrifying.
CM Punk.
No, that's not terrifying at all. Phil Brooks is really intimidating.
But he was in Rabid as well, the new Rabid.
Oh, the new Rabid, yes. I didn't realize. Okay, cool. He's really good. The new Rabid wasn't very good, was it? I mean, let's face it. Each to his own. The Girl on the Third Floor. The Girl on the Third Floor, I thought was really good, and Phil Punk or wherever his name was.
Punk or CM Brooks? No,
CM
Brooks.
Phil Punk, and he's good in it. Although you're meant to hate him, he's a total git in it. And it's the Girl on the Third Floor is that old chestnut, the haunted brothel. So he moves into this house. He's a bit of a git because he's previously cheated on his wife, and it takes him about 0.3 seconds to cheat on his wife again when some young, fairly attractive woman shows up in this new house where he's waiting for his wife to join him. She's pregnant and she's in a different city. But it builds and builds. It's got loads of weird kind of what only can be described as vaginal and what's a polite way of saying cum imagery. There's spunk. Yeah, there's jizz kind of dropping out of the wall or the electrical sockets, and because it's a haunted brothel, and it builds and builds and builds, and it really pays off with some really impressive gore. There's a sequence involving marbles, which is really hard to watch, and great effects, which I assume can only be a mixture of CG and practical effects, but works really well. It's the perfect storm of those two styles of makeup effects. So yeah, great shout out for Girl on the Third Floor, which is one of the best, I guess, low budget indie horror films I've seen in the recent months.
Was that it? Is that all you've watched? Is that all you've watched?
You come in here with your... I did watch Parasite, which won the Oscar for Best Film, which arguably is a horror film, and also lots of other things. But Parasite's really, really good and deserves the acclaim it's had. And in fact, is probably closer to something like The People Under the Stairs. It's when you watch it, if you're a fan of Wes Craven's good films, you'll notice that it kind of covers similar territory, especially People Under the Stairs, which I always really liked.
Fair enough.
So yeah.
Well, I've seen the trailer to that before the Oscars and everything. So this looks interesting. And then of course now it's look, it's won the Oscar. Blah 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 blah. And everybody wants to see it now. So it's going to be it's going to be majorly hyped. So by the time probably I get around to watching it, I'll hear loads of stuff, and then I'll think,
Well, there's that. Yeah, I get that. There's that, but there's also what is annoying about it winning the Oscar. Although I was really happy that it won. There's this thing that happened as soon as it won. It was like, oh wow, and it turns out that South Korea have made other good films. Hang on a minute, where were you 20 years ago when we were all sat around watching Old Boy and Tale of Two Sisters and all these even by the same director, Bong Joon-ho, who made Memories of Murder and The Host. Did
you know Korea's had a film market for nearly 60 plus years? Surprise!
Let's just check out.
Just discovered this one.
What else did those South Koreans? I mean, they've just come out of nowhere, haven't they? Let's just go, oh, what is this? Sympathy for Lady Vengeance. Oh, that looks interesting. Yeah, that's very annoying. But now, of course, everybody's looking into it because it's won the Oscar for Best Picture. So that's a shame. Well, it's good, obviously, for the
Korean film market.
60 years of great films they've been making that have been ignored. But and it's also good for the nerds in us all, where we were watching this guy's films years ago, like The Host was at Fright Fest. I think it was the closing film of Fright Fest. And the same for Chuck Pan-wook. Chan Park-wook. Yeah, that's it. I'm so sorry.
Yep.
Whose Old Boy was at Fright Fest along with probably a few of the others. So yeah, if it's going to get them noticed, then it's a good thing.
Well, that's it. So, as we mentioned, the films that we done for the book is going to be called Spotlight on Horror, and as Stephen mentioned, it's supposed to be coming out about April-ish time. Did you know, Stephen, there's a limited edition?
Good God, what does that possibly mean?
It's strictly limited to only 500. So you have to pre-order it pretty much. I'd suggest pre-ordering it as soon as you can. So the website to go to is unsunghorrors.co.uk. And of course, then you can order maybe We Belong Dead and other stuff while you're there. But go there and pre-order Spotlight on Horror, which looks at, I think it's supposed to be about 160 plus films from over 100 the last 100 years. But it's got a really cool, I presume you've seen the cover to the book.
It's fantastic. It's really good.
I seen the picture for it. I was like, that's awesome. If only just because it's got the Blind Dead on the front cover.
It's fantastic, isn't it? Yeah, Graham Humphrey stuff, all of it, whether it's a book cover or a movie cover, a DVD cover, always you just want it on your wall.
Exactly. So yeah, unsunghorrors.co.uk. Go pre-order Spotlight on Horror. Of course, if it sells out, that maybe We Belong Dead will do more books in the future, and who knows? Me and Stephen might be writing for others in the future.
That's true, and if you want us to sign like your copy, that will automatically devalue it by at least £10.
Oh.
I mean, increase the value of it by at least £10.
Oh, okay. So the book is £30, I believe, somewhere around there.
Yeah, which is great actually, because I know the cost of printing are a fortune. And he's been doing this for a while, and I think some have sold super well, and some have struggled a little bit to sell the required number to actually recoup the cost. But they're always these really lavish looking full color books that I think he would do in hardback, but hardback costs even more of a fortune. So they're these very handsome coffee table paperbacks that just full color.
Yeah, they are really good, and if you order it from that website. They do ship out to America and the rest of the world, but obviously postage is going to be a little bit more, but I would say it's definitely worth it.
And the intro, I think, was confirmed the other day, but the intro for this one, I think in the past he had John Landis for the last one, possibly Joe Dante, correct me if I'm wrong, but for this one it's going to be Kim Newman, which is a nice chap to do the intro.
There was a talk about a few different people to do it, but yeah, Kim Newman apparently is the guy that's going to be doing it. So yeah, I'm looking forward to obviously a bit like yourself, looking forward to actually getting it in our own hands and going, oh look, and enjoying it just for our own articles. We're not going to read anybody else. It's just going to read our own.
Oh yeah, it's always the same. Pull the curtains shut, turn the music down low, key in the lock, look at your own work, and then shut the book.
Fold the book in the right place. When somebody comes around, you go, just flick the book open. It opens up on your own work page straight away.
Oh, look at this.
Oh, what a chance. It's landed on my own page.
Oh. Always the same. Every week when my parents come around is the same.
Yeah, just books everywhere. Look, Stephen. Definitely worth doing. The previous books, you did stuff for 70s Monsters Memories, didn't you?
Yeah, there were 70 Months Memories.
Unsung Horrors.
Unsung Horrors. Yeah, there were 2 Unsung Horrors. I think the second one was Son of Unsung Horrors. Yeah. The 70s Monster Memories, I think, was the first one, and down the line, there's meant to be an 80s Monster Memories as well. He did a Peter Cushing one, which I didn't take part in, which is a great one, and that was a huge seller from what I remember. As in, you can't get it after a short while once it was out. And Vincent Price was the most recent one he did, where I did something about Vincent in that. But yeah, they're all really good. There's a nice mixture of writers, people that are just fans of the films that want to add their 2 penneth about whichever one they've chosen.
So yeah, that's that. So now we've plugged that book, Stephen. I think we plugged that book pretty well.
I'm drained. Spent.
We shall move away from books and things like that, and we will talk about a film from the 70s.
Yeah.
A film that's older than me, but surprisingly, even older than you.
It's been proven by history.
Yes, the Go-Go Girls from 1972 by Herschell Gordon-Lewis, who most famously, most people would know, is Blood Feast, The Wizard of Gore, and 2000 Maniacs. That's the three most people would have heard of, I would have thought. I can't think of any other straight off my, if you used to say something. Well, what would be the first one that popped into your head if you said Herschell Gordon-Lewis?
It would always be Blood Feast because probably because it was first, but also it really is the most famous of them. It's been remade and
it's really good remake.
Really well.
Yeah, really good. And of course, if you don't understand British sarcasm, we're both being very sarcastic.
Terrific. Yeah, it's not the lowest form of wit. Blood Feast started it all in terms of not just Herschell Gordon-Lewis, but it kickstarted the whole splatter film thing, really. In the past, before it, there were things like, there were really gruesome horror movies of the late 50s, like Horrors of the Black Museum, which I suppose you could say were early slasher films and really structured around creative deaths. But Herschell went there in terms of close-up, lingering shots of, as we will see from the Go-Go Girls, close-up, lingering shots of people being maimed. Yeah. And in the Go-Go Girls, more maimed than ever before.
More maimed than ever before.
That was on the posters, and on the buses. Not on the buses, the show, on the buses.
Oh. But yeah, so this film would have been, if he didn't make any other film, this would have been his last film ever. But as it was, this would have been Herschell Gordon-Lewis's last film until Blood Feast 2, which came about 30 years later.
Yeah.
So it would have been interesting to see if he stuck with it after the Go-Go Girls, to see, it would be interesting to see him come into like the video market days and see what he would have tried to bring out then. But as it was, it didn't happen. But for those who want to know what the Go-Go Girls is about, it's, so I pretty much, the gist of it is, there's a person knocking off Go-Go Girls at a local strip club, and a very camp, I would say,
he's as straight as the next man.
A very camp PI / detective gets called in by a reporter to look into it, but he's only really doing it for the money, and it's a black comedy more than anything, I would have thought. That's how I would describe it. It's more of a black comedy with a bit of horror chucked in than the other way around.
Yeah.
But that's the gist of the film. It sounds very simplistic, but that is pretty much the plot.
I don't know how you can say a man with that floral shirt, waistcoat, and cane could possibly be construed as being camp.
Well, I wasn't referring to him actually possibly being gay or whatever. I was more going with the way he was acting. It's very here I am, very theatrical, I would say. How's that?
There's a great moment in the, I didn't really watch the extras, but I did watch the bit on the Arrow disc with Stephen Thrower, who's always really lovely in these extras and stuff. But he does compare him, and it all made sense when I listened to Stephen Thrower, but he compared him to things like, for British audiences of a certain age, to John Steed in The Avengers, Patrick Macnee, and Jason King, this certain kind of Britishness. And as Stephen Thrower describes it, there weren't many different kinds of British characters in films, but posh homosexual was the main one. So I think we've got one of those here.
Posh homosexual was a British person, and the other British person was basically a Dick Van Dyke type character.
Dick Van Dyke. Oh, blimey, me.
There's only two type of British people. That's all we have.
Cockney, bit of rough, and posh homosexual.
Yeah.
And actually, as me and Pete know, that is pretty much the only types of British men that you see on the streets.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, I would say that's pretty fair. There's no in between. Those who are in between are more women, I would have thought, than men.
But yeah, it turns out they're actually women, those ones. Yeah. We, of course, fit into the new category of incredibly butch, intimidating men.
Grr, men.
Yeah, 4.
Oh, 4?
Oh, sorry.
So, yeah, the guy that we're talking about, he's definitely a PI, isn't he? A detective of some sort. But
yeah,
his name is Abraham Gentry, which is such a theatrical name just by itself.
Gentry.
Yes, and he's played by a guy called Frank Kress, who I could not find anything about in regards to any other films he'd done, theatre stuff, but he's actually quite a good actor. If you looked at other Herschel Gordon Lewis movies and seen the actors in it, he's probably the best actor in all of Herschel Gordon Lewis's films, because a lot of them are, hey, do you want to be in a film? Yeah, okay. Can you act? Not really, but yeah, okay.
I think that's it. I think I may be wrong, but is this the first Herschel Gordon Lewis where the two main characters are actually real characters rather than compared to the earlier ones? There is some interesting characters in the earlier ones, like the mad woman in is it the Gruesome Twosome? And of course the bad guy in Blood Feast is really fun. But the heroes of this one, Nancy and Abraham Gentry, are actually quite fun people to be around.
Yes, Abraham Gentry, and the reporter is Nancy Weston. I think that's what her name was.
Yeah.
She's played by Amy Farrell, who I said previously to you earlier today was in Airport 1975. So I don't know if I didn't really recognize her. I have seen Airport 1975, but I didn't recognize her. But yeah, I would say that these two characters are probably the most fleshed out. I'll say that loosely. Fleshed out characters in a Herschel Gordon Lewis film compared to his other films. So basically, hey, you're a hick, so here's a straw hat, and you're going to chase a pig. So obviously you're a redneck. Whereas these two characters are actually written as characters with a slight backstory to them, but not a lot. But it's more than what everybody else would normally get in a Herschel Gordon Lewis film. But they are interesting characters. They are two characters. More Abraham Gentry is the sort of character I would want to watch again in something else. Maybe not as a whole thing, but as like a come-in kind of cameo type thing. Yeah,
for sure. The two of them, actually, they're a good double act, aren't they? And I think, if anything, it would be good because all the way through the Gorgor Girls, he just has about 26 different versions of the pun. She seems to have lost face.
Yes.
Which is just the joke that keeps on giving. I think they almost beg for a gory TV spin-off, if gory TV spin-offs were a thing in the 70s, which they weren't. But they're good fun.
But yeah, so the gist of it is that those two, Nancy comes along and comes to Abraham's door and offers him, is it $500 or it's more than that. It's loads. It's like 50 odd thousand at the beginning or something like that.
Yeah.
But he only gets 500 or something to basically agree to it. So he does it, and she wants him to look into the murders of this strip club. And if he works out who the murderer is, the paper will get exclusive rights to the story, and of course he will get a big paycheck out of it. So a win-win situation, but more him because he's also getting a big paycheck out of it.
Yeah. This is the guy that tries to order, is it a cordon bleu at the strip club?
Yeah, so have a cordon bleu, please. And in a clean glass.
They're out of stock.
Yeah, so you can have tonic water. Tonic water on its own. Nom, nom, nom. But, so they go to the strip club, which I don't think actually has a name, does it? I don't recall it having a name. It's
I don't know.
Maz's something or other. Maz's, I don't know.
Yeah.
Whatever. But it's your typical dark, dingy 1970s looking strip joint.
It is. Yeah. It's the image I have of a strip joint. Having not been in one, I assume this is what a strip club looks like on the inside. Very depressing.
Yeah, and it'll be a bunch of guys who are either married or not, to basically sit there lingering at these young girls dancing along to music that really does not fit the dancing that they're doing.
Well, it's like surf music.
Yes, it's certain music in certain bits, and there's other bits where it's classical music, and this woman's doing like a cabaret act. It really does not go together, but okay. But so those two go there to investigate the murders. I don't know why they had to go specifically there first. And they pretty much spend the whole time of the film at the strip joint. Whether this is Abraham Gentry's choice, we don't know. As we said, he is flamboyant, shall we say?
Entirely straight.
Yes.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, so there's been murders happening at this strip club. Not actually at the strip club, but the people that work there has been killed off one by one in fantastical different ways. As I'm sure we will mention one of the most bizarre murders later on. And eventually you find out the killer is actually somebody who works at the strip joint.
Ooh. Yeah.
Ooh.
Well, that's just, I mean, am I right in thinking I hadn't watched this for a while, and you go through, like you said, the combination of long stripping scenes, and then incredibly gruesome murders, and then the explanation at the end is this killer, that this person that's been horribly burned in the past and has sneaked their way back into the strip club where they were previously not allowed anymore. And isn't that the plot of Aerobicide? Isn't Aerobicide the same story?
This is basically what I was watching it, and I was like, because I haven't watched this film in a long time.
Yeah.
I was watching on that. I think you've got it as well. That excellent Arrow box set with all the Herschel Gordon Lewis films in it.
Yes, that's a great set. Yeah.
I was watching on that, and the woman that we talk about who's the killer is called Marlene. So the gist of the story of her is she was a ex female wrestler who had a terrible accident somewhere along the line, and the guy that she's with is actually the guy who runs the strip joint. So she's in with him anyway, but because she couldn't get any work anywhere, like being a stripper or that type of thing, he puts pity on her and allows her to have a job at the strip joint, but not doing what she wants to do. So it's basically a horribly disfigured woman, apart from her face, going around killing off pretty women, which, as Stephen correctly mentioned, is pretty much the plot to Aerobicide, which is my favourite slasher film from the 80s.
Yeah, absolutely. And also the whole thing, not just with the reveal of the killer at the end and the Aerobicide connection, but also the insanity of the murders. This is very much, and of course the Black Glove Killer. This is very much a giallo type Herschel Gordon Lewis film, isn't it?
That's what I was going to say. It's whether, because it's not actually him that wrote the script for this one. I can't really have a guy who's called Andy. I can't remember his name, but it's Andy something. But yeah, he's obviously seen giallo type movies because the killer is obviously decked up in black gloves, black leather coat, blah blah blah, and all this kind of stuff. So it's definitely got giallo elements chucked into it. Whether that was intentional or not, I don't know. But the film kicks off with we having a woman looking all pretty and jolly, look at me, and then her face getting smashed into a mirror. So
which is a very giallo moment, isn't it?
Yeah, it's very. I suppose if you was watching, you think, cripes, if this is how this film's going to start off, imagine what the rest of the film's going to be like. But of course, as we know, the film is not like that. It's a black comedy / horror going through it.
Sure.
But there is some gore elements in it, which one of them features a meat tenderizer, doesn't it, Stephen?
Yeah, well, that's just it. The thing is, with the Murders in Go-Go Girls, if this were a film that wasn't played the way it was, this would be one of the more controversial films of its time because it's outrageously nasty. You know, as you said, there's, the victims are all women, and there's an emphasis on their blouses or their pants getting ripped off. Mm-hmm. And as you quite rightly says, I think it's the third kill, which is where the woman has her pants ripped off and basically a meat tenderizer to her bare bottom, and the killer literally pours salt and pepper into the wounds. Meanwhile, on the soundtrack is a marching band, and then and squishes her up and pulls out her eyeballs. So this is extreme, the kind of extreme stuff that you didn't typically see in most of the giallo. Yep. Even the nastier of Bava's films and Argento's films at this time didn't have such lingering shots of open wounds and eyeballs being ripped out. They were very cruel, and they were all about beautiful women getting mutilated, but they were more in a kind of thriller context. But this film is deliberately so far over the top and so obviously meant as a sick joke on everybody, with the soundtrack maybe being the most obvious thing about that, you know, that you can't take it seriously. So, I mean, the movie even comments on itself by having the group of protesters outside the strip club, which the women's group. You know, I've forgotten what the slogan is, but
women right on or something like that.
Something like that. Yeah, it's something like lewd is crude. It's all that kind of stuff.
Crude, yeah.
So that it's already acknowledging any criticism of being misogynistic. I mean, if you took it seriously, then obviously that's your problem anyway. But the fact that there's comedy trumpets and the fact that Abraham Gentry is drifting through, smiling at crime scenes all the way through, says it all really. But yeah, the scene with the meat tenderizer is one of the very nasty but strangely amusing murder set pieces in this one.
I mean, as both you mean, I imagine quite a few of the listeners who have ever watched a Herschel Gordon Lewis film knows that he's considered the godfather of gore, and the films that he done previously to this had gory moments in it, but this is the one where you get more lingering shots of people's faces being smashed in and all mushed up and all that kind of stuff. But as you mentioned, because of the music that's going over to it, it's obviously done in a look what we're doing, but it's kind of like a swan song kind of thing. Look, this is what this is what you know me for, but I'm going out on a bang kind of thing.
And I think that's it. And, if you look at even the censorship of this thing, this thing has been uncut in the UK for a long time. I believe there was a DVD by Tartan years ago that was uncut. And if you look at the other side of things, New York Ripper in this country is still censored for a scene of what they consider to be sexual violence, because it's a naked woman being tormented. But this is the film that has a woman's nipples being snipped off in close-up, one of which chucks out milk and the other chucks out chocolate milk that the killer puts in a glass and then toasts himself with. And of course, that's not really any different to the kind of extreme stuff Fulci was doing in the still censored New York Ripper. But the context is this is the Herschel Gordon Lewis gore thing where he's clearly having a joke at this stuff. And again, it's your problem if you find this stuff offensive, because it's meant to be funny. It's meant to be so far over the edge, because presumably at this stage in his career, he'd done so much and all this other nasty stuff was starting to come out, more serious stuff like Night of the Living Dead.
Well, that's what I was about to say.
He had to compete with it, right?
Yeah, basically, when this came out, you'd have things like Last House on the Left is coming out around about this sort of time. Yeah. So, what's going on in this film? Yes, it's what's been done to women is nasty stuff, but compared to what you see in Last House on the Left, this is obviously done more in a tongue-in-cheek, dark humor kind of thing. So, if you don't like dark humor, this film's definitely not for you. But
I think that's it. And I think the only way he could presumably stay relevant was by doing the same stuff he was always doing, which was always in this kind of humorous way, but taking it to the next level in terms of graphic gore. And because it goes on so long, it is ridiculous. You can see, obviously, there've always been mannequin heads and and all that stuff. Whereas Last House is this kind of, it looks like a news bulletin in its nastiest moments.
Yeah.
And it's really horrible, and it is meant to be. But I guess the only thing he could do at this stage, although he's probably at this stage already irrelevant because the serious stuff is the stuff that's getting people into the cinema, like Last House, was to just go all out and throw everything into the thing.
It's an entertaining film, and even if this was if this was going to be his last film, I would say he went out with a decent enough bang to you to go, yes, I've just watched a Herschel Gordon Lewis film, because he has a unique style, whether you've seen any of his films or not. If you've seen clips of something of his and you've just walked into a room and you went, oh, this is a Herschel Gordon Lewis film, because you could tell by certain shots that he does that is a Herschel Gordon Lewis film. Because certain people have a certain look. You could tell what a Spielberg film is, and you could tell what a Roland Emmerich type film is. You can definitely tell what a Michael Bay film is.
John Carpenter. Yeah, Michael Bay. Michael Bay films, just to remind people, are the ones with the upskirt shots of girls straddling motorcycles.
And explosions.
Yeah, and them. Michael Bay, then that's the thing, Michael Bay is an awful human being.
So...
Anyway.
But yeah, I wouldn't say this was my favorite Herschel Gordon Lewis film, but it's far from being my least.
Yeah,
I'm trying to think of one that I don't actually like the most, but yeah, this is definitely It's up there in the top 6, I would have said, out of all of them.
Oh, for sure. I think it has to be. Yeah, but it has more going on than some of them, but maybe not the charm of a couple of the others. That I really like the Gruesome Twosome because it is this wacky kind of, and 2001 Maniacs is really fun. But yeah,
what was the first Herschell Gordon Lewis film you ever watched?
I think it actually was the Gruesome Twosome because I'd never watched Blood Feast, possibly because it was still cut over here or wasn't available over here. But I remember getting the Something Weird DVD and spending the first 10 minutes going, wow, there's 2 mannequin heads talking to each other. Were they trying to fill in time with this? And I just love the mad old woman in that because it is part of that 60s. It had a very 60s vibe. And I really like the 60s things with typically old women in the American films. It was people like Joan Crawford as the main characters. But this was the Herschell Gordon Lewis version of it. And it clearly was not really an old woman. It was like some young person dressed up as an old woman. But that made it even more fun.
As it usually was, yeah. The first one I watched of his was 2000 Maniacs. And that was...
2000 Maniacs is great.
It was on a video shop. I went to a video shop and they were selling, like, clearing their stock, basically. And they had a video in there which looked like it'd come from the back end of nowhere. And I was like, I have no idea what this film is. So I picked it up, watched it, and then I kind of got hooked on his films and spent the next few years looking up to watch the other ones. And it wasn't long after this, then DVD came out. So it was, like you mentioned earlier, Tartan Video put out, like, the Blood trilogy originally.
Yeah.
Things like that. But, yeah, they are films of their era.
Oh, they truly are. And that's why they're so much fun. And this one... Oh,
sorry.
Sorry. I'm just wondering if this one, which is, I suppose it's 1972, but this one, is this the first horror film that has a totally mental Vietnam veteran as one of the red herrings?
Yeah, I would say yes, but I'm sure somebody might correct us somewhere on the line.
Yeah, I'd like to know because I was watching this and I'd forgotten totally about this character. And it feels like Herschell Gordon Lewis's parody of usually Giallo films have about 26 red herrings. Yep. And in this case, it's a massive one. It's this guy at the bar called Grout. Grout, which is a fantastic name, who spends his time drawing faces on tomatoes and butternut squashes and then crushing them just to relieve tension. And then they have a chat about him. And it's, he was in the Vietnam, he was in Nam, and he does this to relieve tension. Because he thinks he's still busting in the heads of dead gooks. What? So clearly, he's not the killer, but you spend a few minutes in the company of this guy who's just hanging around with his vegetables.
Yep.
And I don't remember. It's the Vietnam War was going on for some considerable time, but of course later on it would become a cliche of villains in films, but also red herrings in horror movies and slasher films. But I'm wondering if this is one of the earliest, maybe the earliest.
I would have thought it'd probably be the earliest one at the moment. Yeah. But did you know that this film was also known as Blood Orgy?
Wow, which makes sense.
I didn't know this. I never even realized it had a different title until earlier today. I realized it had a different title, and this was because apparently certain markets didn't know what a go-go girl was.
Wow.
They had to change the title because obviously Americans would know what a go-go girl was because that was a big thing, strip teases and all that. But they didn't know what a go-go girl was, which of course the go-go girls is a play on. So they changed it to Blood Orgy, which the blood bit makes sense.
But there's no orgy.
There's no orgy.
In fact, there's no in Herschel's films. There's no sex generally, is there?
No,
at most, it's nudity.
Well, as I say, this is the only one you actually see a bare nipple.
Yeah, and even in this, from what I remember, there's no frontal nudity. It's just boobs, right?
You see boobs and bottoms. That's it.
Bottoms. Which makes to me, along with the all the kind of sped up carousel music and marching band stuff and smutty stuff and she lost face 3 times one-liners. To me, this is basically Carry On Herschell Gordon Lewis, isn't it?
Yeah, but
it kind of is, which is a good thing. I'm not saying that's a bad thing.
But did you?
You know what
oh yeah, carry on.
No, what I really like, I wrote this down because it amused me so much, but then I'm easily amused. But the newspaper article at the start, which pretty much tells you everything you need to know about how seriously to take this film, is two things are funny about it, where it shows a close-up of the headline. Yeah, Cream Puff. One is that the girl's real name was Ethel Cream Puff rather than Susie, and obviously Ethel is the least sexy name of all time. But also that even the newspaper article is saying something like, last night, exotic striptease artist Susie Cream Puff lost her name. She really was creamed last night. Yeah. What? Which is brilliant. And again, in the first few minutes after that really nasty face smashing in the mirror, you get a total confirmation of the type of movie you're about to watch.
But did you work out who the killer was before the actual reveal?
There's a really obvious giveaway where they're talking about her. Which seemed to be some way in, but it totally gives it away. And immediately I was thinking, oh, hang on a minute, isn't this like a Robicide? But probably due to my rubbish ability to predict killers, probably the first time I didn't know. But in retrospect, it's really obvious.
Yeah, and the fact that she keeps changing her hair and her leotard type wear constantly throughout the film, because she disappears for 5 seconds and then comes back and hang on a minute, you got a new wig on.
It's extremely obvious, and that's part of its charm as well. And it is setting up the future influences.
There's a bit right at the end of the film which I've always liked this at the end of films anyway, if they ever did it, is the bit where they would close the film by pulling down the screen or putting a cup or something in front of the camera so it closes it, something like that, just so the film, the film's ended, they know the film's ended, so you're kind of in on it.
Absolutely, that's great, isn't it? I don't remember, Herschel's films were always very nudge, but I don't think they ever did anything as nudge as this, where Nancy and Gentry look at the camera and they basically say, "You've seen enough," and pull this shutter down. So I think, and there's a couple of moments earlier on where he looks at the camera or talks to the camera.
Yes, it's when he orders her the I can't remember the drink. There's a zombie with something in it.
And the cocktail, a zombie. Yeah. In a tall glass.
Yeah, it orders that, and she has the drink, and then he orders her another one. And she goes, "I will see you later." And he turns to the camera and says something along the lines of, "I don't think you will." And then, that's it.
It's brilliant, and there is that sense of Herschel thinking, well, this is probably going to be the last one actually, because I've had enough, and times are changing. They want all these really rough films that are a bit too serious, so I'm off. And even the closing credit says, "We announce with pride the movie is over," which is like a swan song thing to do. And this stuff was sort of happening. Like Blazing Saddles has the famous ending where it pulls back and they're clearly on a film set. And Life of Brian is kind of like that as well. But this, for the horror genre, was one of the earliest ones where it would pull back and remind you that you're watching a movie. And it works really well, and it fits with the kind of jovial tone. This is the most cheerful film ever to feature about 4 or 5 really gory murders of women.
Yeah, there's the face smashing in one at the beginning. There's meat tenderizer. The woman who gets her face put in a chip pan. And burns away. Trying to think what the other ones are, but
there's a bubblegum girl, isn't there? That makes it quite unsettling, the fact that she's blown a bubble and she's killed while she's still got that in her mouth,
which is actually a condom.
Oh, that makes sense.
It's a condom full of blood.
It's a good visual, isn't it? It's maybe the most kind of unpleasant thing about that bit is that she's still got the bubble.
So there you go.
It's very squelchy.
Yes, but it's an entertaining film. It's definitely one I'd watch again anyway. But it was a good pick, Stephen. Good pick.
I think so. And I think it holds up. And when you watch it now, you kind of see how lots of other films later on, I suppose generally with Herschel's films, the kind of style of acting is very Troma-ish when Troma came along. I don't like all Troma films, but the best ones have the kind of knowing wink and broad acting style that this film does. Which makes them kind of fun. And even John Waters is very influenced by Herschel Gordon Lewis and things like Serial Mom. And he has a sequence that's pretty much a remake of this one in a film called Pecker, where there's a group of female protesters outside a building moaning about pubic hair or something. So the influence of Herschel is pretty vast, even though after this he went into marketing, right?
Yeah, went into marketing, copywriting, I think it is, advertising or something. Yeah. But yeah, did that for 30 plus years, and then of course came back with Blood Feast 2.
Which is fantastic.
Yeah. So
I mean, the fact they came back and made it, it's quite a fun sequel.
But as you mentioned a Troma film, mentioned Troma then, I was kind of thinking, I wonder what Troma film we should potentially talk about in a retro rewind somewhere along the line. One that Stephen doesn't like, perhaps?
Oh, good God, no.
I don't know. We shall see. So, that's the Gorgoroth Girls. Definitely one to watch if you want to look further outfield the Blood trilogy and possibly look at their Herschel Gordon Lewis films. Again, it is a film of its time, so what you see in it, obviously, see it as it is, and it is very black humor, tongue-in-cheek. It's more that than the horror, apart from the very gory moments in it. And of course, it has Abraham Gentry in it. It's probably the most fun character I've seen in a film for quite a while.
He's great. Yeah, he's great. And it is, and it's never truly nasty because of him and because of everything else. It's one of the goriest films that isn't actually unpleasant or, genuinely nasty. It's extremely likable. And it's got Henry Youngman in it.
Yes, I was waiting for you to mention him, but I didn't know who he was. It's one of them people that sort of hear, such and such is in the film, and then you find out he's a comedian. When you see the bit in the film, you go, oh yes, that's the guy, the comedian.
And he gets a whole routine. Apparently, I don't know if this was true. I just read a brief thing that suggested he tried to deny the fact that he was ever in this film, where of course he's in it so much it would be impossible to deny. But he also pops up in films like Goodfellas for a similar kind of walk-on cameo, because he was a famous early stand-up comic, famous for his like rapid-fire jokes. A few of which are in this, right?
Yeah, one of them's the one where he tells the guy to spin the light around the spotlight on the audience, and then he stops and then he goes, I said he could only do that because he used to work at Sing Sing.
And he says as well, he does a joke in this film where Abraham's constantly making jokes about the faces being, the faces being ripped off the women, but he does a joke about, my wife wanted a facelift for $80, they lowered her body. There's this constant kind of old school stand-up comedy, which is actually quite amusing, especially in this context. And it's bizarre that he's in it as the club kind of impresario guy.
Yeah, but I didn't know who he was.
It meant more in 1972, or maybe, I don't know.
Yeah, but there we go. So yeah, that was the Gorgoroth Girls list. You've got anything else you'd like to say about Herschel Gordon Lewis, or just the Gorgoroth Girls himself?
I think that's probably it. There's the Arrow set's really good. If anyone watches this and wants to watch more,
more likely to listen to it, but they could watch it if they want to watch it.
That would be a bit weird, wouldn't it? Yeah. And there's a good documentary in the set, which I watched years ago, but is really good about his career. And as you said, with a massive 30 or so year gap in between movies. And last year he died, or the year before, a very elderly gentleman.
A couple of years ago, I think.
Yeah.
I remember him. I didn't think he did anything over here, but definitely in America, he became more famous for his films later. After the video boom and everything, and people are like, oh look, there's this film, and then of course you had like Fangoria and Reed Morgan, whatever, writing up articles about him. So of course he started like the festival circuits. So appreciation for his he did actually get to see the appreciation for his films before he kicked the bucket. So there was that, which is good.
That's cool.
As opposed to making films and then thinking, well, that's that done. That part of my life is now done and buried. Nobody will ever find them ever again. But
well, that's it. Yeah.
As we know, films are constantly getting rediscovered that are considered lost, or and sometimes don't even know is being made.
That's right. Yeah. We have to consider him to be like just as important as people like George Romero, in the sense of he changed things up to a massive degree. He was the one that was kind of there first. He built on stuff that was already there. He adapted for changing times, like in this one, but he was the first one to kind of make these splatter-driven films that were all about that. And they knew that the rest of their scenes weren't that great, but they were all about the big set pieces.
Yeah. So overall, I would definitely say pick up the Arrow box set, which has all his films in it. But if not, then I believe quite a few of them are on single discs now, I would have thought.
Yeah.
Arrow, that I presume that's worldwide. I have no idea, but yeah. So let's move away from the Girls and move on to other women, Stephen, in horror. Not just
that's a good link.
Yeah, I was thinking of something else, but my mind got distracted by women, so I moved on. So yeah,
as always.
Yeah, so it's women in horror. That's where this is all leading up to, Stephen. The Girls leads up to women in horror.
Girls become women. Yeah, that's a really good link, actually. Yeah.
So so this isn't just women in front of the camera, Stephen. So you scream queens and victims or whatever else. No, this is women behind the camera, not just as director or producer, but as writer.
Yeah, of course. Oh, what, they can write as well? Yeah, okay, yeah, sure.
They can do more things than men can.
Well, I was going to say, are we going to have a men in horror episode as well? Bloody men.
Imagine have to have something to equal it out.
Well, that would only be fair, right? I mean, these women take over this episode. What about the men? The poor men that have always suffered, barely any work, reach a certain age, and then on the trash heap.
Yeah.
Oh wait, that is women.
That's women in film.
Oh God. Okay. Yeah, we can do it. Yeah.
So I think we'll just stick with women in horror.
Yep, they deserve it.
So, what I'm gonna start off with saying, what was the first film that you watched, a horror film that had a woman in it, and then you went, she's kind of an icon for what I'm watching. So Jamie Lee Curtis in Halloween would be considered the scream queen for the 70s kind of thing. What would be the first person you watched and went, so this is what this woman is called, a scream queen. This is what they do, is it?
Yeah, that's a great one. I'm not entirely sure, but there's three that stand out for me in terms of, and it's all about as you, it's the same for you, but it all depends, like, because it was the 80s for me, it all depends what was available, which wasn't very much, and what I was kind of able to watch in terms of physically able, whether it's on TV or in the video shop. But there's three that really stand out from the first horror movies that I saw. So one is Fay Wray, because I saw the original and still the best King Kong movie when I was probably about 5 or 6, because it was on TV quite a lot. And I think by the 80s, they'd restored it, so it was a little more gruesome than it was in the 60s or the 30s when it came out. And Fay Wray's great, and Fay Wray popped up as these really feisty characters in things like Mystery of the Wax Museum and Dr. X. And in King Kong, she's the original Scream Queen, right?
I would say she's the original Scream Queen.
She has to be. I mean, it's helped by the fact that King Kong came out in 1933, and of course, if you screamed in a film a few years earlier, you couldn't hear them because they were silent. But it's the Silent Queen. That's a bit creepy. But King Kong's obviously a fantastic film, and I don't care about. Obviously, there's things about it that are dated, and if you were to look at it now, that's quite offensive, isn't it? Who cares? It's made in 1933. Of course, it's going to be. It's from a different era. But she's actually a really strong presence in the film. King Kong's in love with her, and you kind of understand why. And she holds her own. And the male lead is a bit of a bastard generally, so you're totally with her, and she's just a really fun actress to watch in these old horror films. So she's one of them. I think, as far as I can remember, I saw Nightmare on Elm Street before I saw the first Halloween. So although I don't think Heather Langenkamp to be Polite is probably not as good an actress as Jamie Lee Curtis. She's really good in the first Nightmare on Elm Street, and I think the problem with maybe number 3 is that she was a bit miscast because she's about 21 and she's already a psychiatrist.
She's very advanced for her age. What can we say?
That's incredible progress.
She's doing terrible at school, but when she got to university, she was fine.
She's really unstable as well. But in the first one, in fact, all the characters in the first one are quite fun. You know, you kind of really like Amanda Weiss's character, even though she goes fairly early on. She's kind of funny. Tina is a good character. But Nancy Thompson in the first one is sarcastic and she's fun. She's got this nice on-screen thing with Johnny Depp. And you really root for her. So she was maybe the first of the modern ones that I thought, oh, wow, you know, I really like her. I'm not sure why, but she's really fun. And, you know, she deserves to beat Freddy Krueger, and she's smart and she's resilient. And she does that. Wes Craven at his best had a thing for, what's the phrase, like DIY traps, like resilient home security stuff, like setting a hammer up so it'll drop on Freddy as soon as he activates a tripwire in your bedroom. That kind of stuff's really good. And I always wanted one of those for my own bedroom. And still not got it, unfortunately. And the third one, again, probably because of timing, but also just because she's so good, is Dee Wallace in Cujo. I watched Cujo quite young, probably when we first got a video player, maybe on TV. And Dee Wallace is so good in Cujo, and I watched it last year, and it's still really good. And the second half, where it's just her absolutely determined to save her son, who at one point almost dies from the threat of the rabid dog outside the car, is just a great performance. And again, even though in this case, you know, she's had an affair, she's not the most saintly of people. If anything, that makes you want to root for her even more because she's a recognizable human being and a great actress. And of course, the fact that she was in E.T., a film that I was allowed to see legally, she's E.T.'s mum. So it made it even more special.
Oh, she's not E.T.'s mum.
She gave birth to that. What?
Here's Elliot and the daughter, and here's Elliot. Here's E.T.
Christ. So those 3 immediately spring to mind, just because I think I would have seen those probably earlier than some of the others.
Mine would be, I would say Ashley Lawrence, so Hellraiser. That would be because I watched that before I'd seen Nightmare on Elm Street.
Yeah.
So it's her. She's quite a strong, feisty woman in that. Of course, Ellen Ripley in the Alien film and Aliens. Yeah. And it's not a horror film, but it's classified slightly, I suppose. But it's a sci-fi film, and it would be Linda Hamilton's character, Sarah Connor, in Terminator.
Yes,
that's the 3 women I kind of grew up film-wise watching, but you sort of looked at them and go, oh, they're quite strong, independent thing. But Scream Queen-wise, it was Ashley Lawrence. I know she doesn't really scream in the film, but
she's really good.
Yeah. That's who I would put, and of course, then you can go way back to, like you said, Faye Rain. You can go to Barbara Steele and all those people as well. But
yeah,
I mean, you could, if you looked at it as far back as possible, one of the first sort of women making films was one of the first films made was by a woman, and it was a horror film. It was, you know, it's not, you're not expecting a masterpiece because this was like 1890, whatever. But
yeah,
compared to, you know, what they were doing at the time, not being allowed to do, you know, vote and all this kind of stuff. And then, of course, you got now what they're allowed to do, you know, what was it? Fright Fest was that one year, and they was really pushing the women in horror thing about being in front of the camera and thing like that.
Yeah,
but really, if you looked at like the indie film market, the amount of women who have directed, written, especially slasher films, I'm sure that certain person will get mentioned shortly. The women have been doing things behind the camera for years anyway, not just in front of. But of course, when you think of a film, generally it was always that we have the lead, we have the handsome man. Now we have to have the lovely looking lady so we can attract the men in. Now it's not so much that. Now it's more I would say it's slightly equalized, but they go more with the acting, which is probably how it should be, not just based on looks.
Yeah.
There's been loads of films. We could talk about films previously, where somebody's been in it and you could tell they was only really hired for the looks. Their acting's terrible.
Of course, yeah.
So,
yeah.
The first person who pops into my mind for recently, anyway, was Raffiket Apicel, who did those 2 short films, Jackson Love and Boo.
Yeah.
Which I really enjoyed. I think she wrote and directed both of those, but she stars in both of them, doesn't she? I believe
she does. She's the actor, yeah, and she's a really kind of engaging presence on the screen as an actor. So even if she didn't write and direct these, you kind of root for her already, even though both of those have a twist that changes the whole thing, right? So they're both cleverly playing on what you think is happening and archetypes, I suppose, of what she's playing. And then it undermines it and you think, oh, actually, right. And she's very clever at that as a writer, but also the way she plays it is very clever. So she clearly is destined for, even better things, presuming that, her short films evolve into feature films, or even if she carries on making short films of that quality, that would be great.
Well, as far as I'm aware, her short films have done pretty good on the festival circuit. She's won various awards at different festivals, so
yeah,
I imagine it would only be to a certain amount of time till somebody goes, here's such and such.
Absolutely.
But another person is, I don't know if you've heard of her, but Dixie Gers, who starred in the remake of Crazy Fat Ethel.
I haven't seen that.
She was really good in that. That's why I've always liked the original one anyway. But this new one came out and she plays the role really well. She's done loads of other stuff as well, but this is the first one I've seen, and she does it really well. And she's a bit like Raffiket Apicel, is quite engaging as just not just as an actress anyway, but if you've seen her in interviews and things like that, she comes across as one of them sort of people that, I've been in films, but I'm quite happy to sit here and talk about, the weather or something, so a bit more exciting than the weather, but just talk to you in general about things and not be all sort of like, I was in a film, that kind of thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's great. Those guys, as you said, have always been around in the indie market. And we're just at a time where Hollywood has suddenly thought, oh, shit, we better, show that we're a bit more willing to, But otherwise, the Fright Fest you mentioned, where I think it was the director of The Ranger, was like the...
Oh, that was it. I was trying to remember what the film was.
Yeah, it was a few, but The Ranger, I think, opened the festival. The Ranger's okay, but it's not like a crowd-pleasing festival opener like they've had in previous years. So clearly they were there to make a point, which is that, hey, there's a few films this year from talented women. We've decided that we should probably showcase them. And here's the first film, The Ranger. But they've always been out there. It's just been a bit buried. And now there's a bit more of an effort to go, oh, we've got to make up for lost time and highlight these very talented people that happen to be women.
Well, it's as we were talking about Herschel Gordon Lewis earlier, and I've said in a previous podcast as well, the thing with indie films, exploitation films and things like that is they obviously outside the system. They're doing stuff that they can't get the money from such and such, from 20th Century Fox or whoever. So they're going to do stuff that, because they haven't got the studio saying, no, you can't do that because you won't get a distribution deal. They just do these things. So you always had women doing that. It's just now, it's like Hollywood is slightly caught up, even though women have been doing stuff behind the camera for years and in front of the camera anyway.
Decades, yeah.
So it's just Hollywood's kind of picked up on maybe several decades a bit too late and realised this kind of thing. But hey ho.
Yes, that's just it, right? Because as you suggest, in the realm of things like Roger Corman, New World Pictures and stuff like that, these female directors were always out there getting work. It's just they couldn't necessarily find it in the quote unquote respectable Hollywood movies. So if you look at the 70s and 80s, there were people like Barbara Peters, who directed Humanoids from the Deep, which is one of the great Roger Corman horror, gore, monster movies from ever, really. And there were directors like Kathy Rubin, who did Strip to Kill and then moved on to things like Poison Ivy in relatively kind of mainstream circles. Amy Holden-Jones did Slumber Party Massacre, which is one of the key slasher films of the early times, and Doris Wishman with A Night to Dismember, which is probably the closest we got to a kind of Herschel Gordon-Lewis style splatter movie directed by a woman.
Yeah. I was just looking up the film I was trying to remember which had women directing. The film was Faust and Mephistopheles.
Bless you.
Thank you. For 1903 is when it was. It was directed by Alice Guy. So there you go.
That's wow. So that may be the earliest kind of significant entry.
Yeah, I would have said so. But of course, nowadays you've had is Amy Holden-Jones. Did you mention her?
Yeah, Slumber Party Massacre. Yep, absolutely. Yep.
Catherine Bigelow, Near Dark.
Yes, which is one of the great 80s horror movies. And she's obviously gone on to huge things like The Hurt Locker and stuff. But her 80s stuff, Near Dark, and then I think 1990 was Blue Steel, which is a really good revival of Jamie Lee Curtis in a kind of horror action cop movie hybrid.
Trying to think of some people. Well, the Soska sisters, obviously. That would be the two that a lot of people would probably go, well, haven't you mentioned them yet? So yeah.
The Soska, they did a good film.
American Mary was the one that a lot of people would probably say is the one that they stand out for, I would have thought.
Easily, yeah. I wasn't a fan of Rabid, which to me seemed like they got this chance to make a new version of it, and they were too fond of the old one to really do anything different, and the different stuff they did do was a bit bland, so I thought that was a bit disappointing. But American Mary is a really great film.
Let's try to think of somebody else. Who did Pet Sematary?
Mary Lambert.
Lambert, yes, I knew it was Mary something. I can't remember what her last name was. So yeah. It's actually surprisingly more directors than you think there is.
Yeah, Mary Lambert's hung around. Like she did, I believe it was the third Urban Legend film. She did the sequel to Pet Sematary, which I actually quite like, which is played for sick laughs more than the first one, but actually seems like she's a bit more off the leash, because the first one I don't think is a classic, but it's good fun. The second one is a bit more of a kind of Peter Jackson style splatter comedy with a sheriff that's come back from the dead and things like that.
1991, you had Rachel Talalali that did He's Dead, The Final Nightmare, which I believe.
Well, she was instrumental in the Elm Street franchise generally. She was one of the producers on the films, and she got the gig of directing Freddy's Dead, and then quite a good film I quite like with The Machine, I think a couple of years later, which is one of the early kind of internet technophobic horror films, which is pretty good. So she's out there.
Axel Caroline, who did Soulmate from 2013. Did she do something for Tales of Halloween as well, I think?
Yes, I think she's in that, and I think she directed one of the many segments of Tales of Halloween. Yeah.
And then, of course, there's Angela Bettis, who
she's very good.
Starred alongside Lucky McGee in most of his films. Who did is it Jennifer Kent that did Babadook?
Jennifer Kent. Yeah, she did a really good short film, which I believe was called Monster before Babadook, and then recently she did The Nightingale, which is a really harrowing rape prevention movie that we mentioned last time, I think.
Which I haven't seen yet. And of course, you mentioned Doris Wishman. Has Daniel Harris ever directed anything?
Possibly. I think she may well have done something. Yeah. I can't. There's a whole bunch. There's Jackie Kong did Blood Diner, which it links to our retro rewind, which is kind of a remake of Blood Feast, really, isn't it? It's pretty much 80s aerobics enhanced version of Blood Feast. There's the wonderful Jennifer Chambers Lynch, who annoyingly is always introduced as daughter of David Lynch, but actually did some really good films. I always stood by Boxing Helena, which I think is a really impressive film. But in latter years, she did a film called Hiss, which is really good, and a kind of nasty, gruesome cop thriller called Surveillance. So she's still out there making films. And yes, she is the daughter of David Lynch.
Jennifer's Body.
Jennifer's Body, directed by Karen Kusama, who made The Invitation, which is an excellent film. Jennifer's Body is a really good film.
The Invitation, it's one of them films that came out and disappeared for a bit. Didn't really, kind of want to watch it. But was the second site that's released it out over here, I believe, recently.
Yes.
I actually thought it was really good, and it has, I just forgot what his name is now, but the guy who looks like Tom Hardy anyway.
Logan Marshall Green now.
That's the name. Yeah, it was in the other film. I just forgot what it's called. The one, crap, what's it called? It was at Fright Fest.
Upgrade.
Upgrade. Yes, that was it.
Yeah.
I actually really good that.
He's great. Yeah, he's really good.
But yeah, there's more talent behind the camera than people think there is.
There is. Yeah.
Because you also said most people just tend to think of what's in front of the camera. But if you're a film buff, you look further and you start looking into who directed it, who wrote whatever and produced and all those kind of things. And you got is it Gail Hurd that did Terminator, and does she produce The Walking Dead or something like that now?
Yeah, Gail Ann Hurd has been around for decades. She was always like James Cameron's producer on Aliens and Terminator, as you said, and later on was heavily involved in Walking Dead, movies like Virus, a whole bunch of big budget studio genre pictures, and she was the kind of big driving force of those.
But I can't think of anybody off the top of my head from the 60s or 70s that were kind of big female directors.
Yeah, it's tricky, isn't it? I don't think there were. I mean, there was obviously, they were out there, but I think it's pretty sparse. So I think the horror genre's biggest gift in the 60s and 70s was just finding cool roles for leading ladies that they weren't getting in mainstream Hollywood. The crucial example maybe being, washed up big stars like Joan Crawford and Bette Davis that Hollywood had dropped like a stone, but they were appearing in tons of really impressive, often campy films, like obviously Baby Jane, but things like Straight Jacket and The Nanny are really interesting. And that's one of the great things about horror, is that it's typically given women the kind of meaty roles they wouldn't have got in other genres, certainly not Westerns. And things like The Nanny and Straight Jacket give those ladies of a certain age fantastic roles.
Yeah, because how dare they, despite how well they can act, how dare they age?
Well, that's just it, isn't it? Gregory Peck never struggled. Oh, he's about 400 years old. We'll have him. But she's 43. She's disgusting.
Okay, fine.
Yes, it's ridiculous. And that's classic Hollywood sexism, which they're now embarrassingly trying to backtrack and do something about. Although even now you get some of the older actresses that actually just go and find better roles in TV, now that TV is much more respected and has a lot more going on. But yeah, in the 60s and 70s, it was things like what they call the hag horror subgenre, is where these otherwise put out to pasture actresses who were once Oscar-winning massive stars got roles they could sink their teeth into. And they're really complicated roles. Like The Nanny is an extraordinary role for Bette Davis, where you feel really sorry for her, but she's still a woman that drowns children in bathtubs.
Does she, though? Does she?
Indeed. We can't say that. You think she might.
No. It's a good film. But
The Nanny's great.
I'm trying to think of some other people that... What's Barbara Steele done recently? It's that thing with the butterflies. Butterfly Room?
Oh, yeah, I did watch that. Barbara Steele was great. She's one of the most striking horror characters or horror actresses of all time. Pit and the Pendulum, Black Sunday, of course.
Yeah, there's loads. But I'm sure we've probably skipped a load. I mean, as I didn't bother writing down loads of notes for this, because we could be here forever talking about women in horror.
Yeah, I think that's it. I think the main trope that everyone goes on about is the final girl. I mean, I'm not quite sure what that means. Really, it's just another word for heroin. Not the good heroin, as in the stuff that you'd pop into your body for a more exciting Sunday night, but the other one.
A bird in your arm. You said heroin. Heron.
Oh, sorry, not a heron. Oh, a heron. We had a heron in the garden once. Terrifying. Massive it was. Although I think it was on heroin.
But dinner was.
Yeah, it's mad. Yeah, no, I think that's it. I think the final girl is the trope, but that's not really any different to great strong heroines of horror history before the slasher film, and there's been a lot of those. And there's a massive list of people, and of course all this Halloween. But before Halloween, there was Sally and Texas Chainsaw, who goes through a lot, but gives it a best shot in terms of survival, and totally mad and bonkers at the end. But I think Sally and Texas Chainsaw is a great figure. Everybody else is pretty useless, the unpleasant guy in the wheelchair and the total useless knobs of the male characters that get polished off pretty quick. No one even remembers them. But Sally in Texas Chainsaw, I think, is one of the great ones. And she maybe, she's one of the early slasher ones that led to Laurie. And Laurie's now, the nice thing about Laurie is she's now been reinvented as this, what is now a grandma character in the new Halloween, having come back as the kind of alcoholic, washed up mum in Halloween H2O.
This is the sequel to the film that has already got a sequel, right?
Which one's that?
Halloween.
Halloween is a sequel to Halloween. Hang on a minute.
Which is
not to be confused with Halloween, which
is now going to have 2 more films apparently.
2 sequels. Yep, she's back and he's back. They're both back.
I told you that was going to happen.
Which makes you wonder. I mean, they could. These actresses are still out there. I mean, it makes you wonder if they will find the others. It makes sense for monetary value if they can. I'm sure Heather Langenkamp is available to get her back as Nancy. Maybe they could get.
Did Adrienne King really die at the beginning of Friday the 13th Part 2? Can we bring her back?
Well, it's already a 10-minute dream sequence, isn't it? Yeah, she's probably okay. Although my favourite of the Friday the 13th final girls, whatever you want to call them, was Amy Steele in the second one. I think she's a more kind of likable character and a stronger character in many ways. The Friday series had some interesting ones. There's a really rubbish one in number 5, I think it is, where you don't really root for her. She just looks like she's come out of the hairdressers. But Amy Steele is great in the second one. And I remember the 4th one having quite a good final girl. After that, it's a bit of a blur. I've watched them maybe too many times and think they're kind of documentaries now. And then, of course, there's the whole other side thing. So you've got the slasher final girls. You've got the post-Ripley kind of almost superhero women of things like Buffy and Alice from Resident Evil. That's a whole other section of heroines that were versions of Ripley, really. That's quite interesting. The Hammer women, of course. What's your favourite Hammer character or heroine or actress?
Well, the obvious one for a lot of people one of my favourite Hammer films from the 70s has always been Captain Kronos. So the obvious Carolyn Monroe. That would be the one. Yeah. Is she a good actress? That's for other people to say.
She's a nice lady to meet, isn't she?
Yeah, she's very friendly. She's very down to earth. I mean, I've seen her in other stuff other than that. She was in Sinbad. I can't remember which one.
Yes. Oh. Yeah.
But yeah, she was in one of them. But yeah, they are what they are for those films.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, it's hard to tell if she's a good actress because she didn't have an awful lot to do in any of those. I watched Dracula AD recently, and she's kind of the naughty one that gets involved in the ritual that gets Dracula back to life. But otherwise, she don't have much to do except to wear some like very skimpy things that her mum presumably said, "You're not going out dressed like that." But my favourite, I don't know actually because there's so many, but I liked is all of them. I liked Valerie Leon's really good in Blood from the Mummy's Tomb.
All right, yeah. What about Ingrid Pitt?
Ingrid Pitt's fabulous, yes. And also an interesting person to meet if you're lucky enough to meet her. But what I really like is
I don't think anybody would meet her nowadays.
They could try it. Oh, she's not available.
She's not here with us. She's not
permanently not available. She is an ex-Ingrid, I guess. Barbara Shelley's really good. Barbara Shelley, do you know what I really like in Barbara Shelley's career is the Dracula Prince of Darkness, where she has a transformation from this really kind of frosty, repressed Victorian woman into a vampire, and she lets it all loose. And that's a great moment where you realize, oh Christ, she's turned to the other side, and the other side, being a vampire, turns out to be much more interesting than a buttoned-down, miserable Victorian housewife that she was before. And she's such a good actress; she plays it well. So maybe the Hammer films didn't have enough opportunities, but then it was all about the good and evil thing with the very attractive heroine somewhere in the middle. Although Linda Hayden, of course,
I was about to say
one of them from Taste the Blood of Dracula, where she's lovely and smiley and stuff, had the great crossover where she becomes one of the great horror villains, I guess, in Blood on Satan's Claw, luring priests.
Yep.
Which is one of those things where you have to have a damp copy of the Radio Times standing by and a cold shower afterwards. So great horror female villains, of which there are many.
Well, yeah, but you mentioned the Hammer films. One of the things that Hammer were known for was their girls. So as you mentioned, Ingrid Pitt, Veronica Carlson, horror Frankenstein.
Yeah, she's really good. Yeah,
and she was in Dracula Have Risen from the Grave.
One of my favorites.
The Collison twins, obviously.
Yes.
Trying to think else is there. There's Jutta Stansgård.
Ah, poor Jutta. Yeah, I actually quite like that film. Lust for a Vampire.
Yeah. And there's Martin Beswick, who I thought was always a good actress. She's quite a nice person to meet if you ever get to meet her. But
yeah, she's in one of the really good ones, isn't she? Because she looks so much like Ralph Bates in Dr. Jekyll and Sister Hyde.
That's one of the ones I actually really like. Some people don't like it; they give it a bit of flack. But I actually think, casting-wise, that's perfection.
It's great.
You couldn't have got that more on than anything.
It's uncanny. Yeah, that's a brilliant piece of and a really witty film. That's one of their best later ones.
And I must mention, from a special moment for me was Teresa van der Woden in Aerobicide. Which, if you don't know who that is, just Google her. Apparently, she didn't do very much. She only made Aerobicide and another film after that. But she kept my teenage years happy.
Oh yikes! I'm guessing that Teresa van Aerobicide, is that her name? I'm guessing she was your version of Richard Gere for me. It was always Richard Gere.
It wasn't Richard Gere, Stephen.
In lingerie.
We all know Richard Gere in lingerie. What the hell?
Maybe in latter years I've turned to Richard Gere in lingerie. Oh yeah. Oh no, don't even say it. Oh, it's so embarrassing. It turns out that my favorite Halloween sequel is Halloween 5.
I was going to say your special moment with Cilla Black, but okay, we're going to get Tamara Glynn. It is.
Oh yes. She doesn't have much to do in Halloween 5, but if you were 11 and there wasn't much on TV except for the occasional Channel 4 late night French film, Halloween 5 was one of those things you would cling to and return to, even maybe 30 years later.
Yeah.
Oh, yes. So yeah, they were great. Hammer villains. Yeah, because I suppose they at least had a bunch of personality. The Universal horror movies didn't have a huge amount. They always had Una O'Connor as the mad old barmaid in what pretended to be English pubs in things like The Wolfman or The Bride of Frankenstein, and Maria Uspenskaya as the gypsy woman that would deliver the famous rhyme about the werewolf. But there wasn't a lot of memorable female characters in the older horror movies. So Hammer probably were a trailblazer for actually characters or actresses that we remembered. And some of those we've mentioned. Sure, there's probably someone from maybe Giallo films that Pete particularly remembers.
Edwige Fenech for that.
Ah!
I would never forget her. How could you possibly forget her? The queen of Giallos.
Yes, and is she the only contender for that title? I mean, the others they seem to come and go, so to speak. There weren't any as memorable or as maybe prolific as she was, right?
Luciana Paluzzi, she did a few.
She was in a couple, right? Yeah.
Put me on the spot. Barbara Boucher, that's another one.
Yes, of course. Yeah.
Rosalba Neri, she was in quite a few. You'd recognize her if you saw her. She had really striking eyes.
Is she in Slaughter Hotel?
There you go. Barbara Bach. That's another one.
Yeah. Also a Bond girl.
Yep. Dagmar Lassander, she was in quite a few as well. Hatchet for the Honeymoon was probably one that you would have seen her in.
Yeah.
Susie Kendall.
Yes. Torso. With the crystal plumage.
But yeah, there was quite a few. And Asia Argento, obviously. That's quite an obvious one.
Yeah, and she's quite interesting. And Daria Nicolodi is another part of the Dario family. She was always quite good in those films. Even when he obviously hated her and just wanted her to have her head blown off, she was always a strong presence.
We've got to find another way to kill you off in a most
guillotine way. Yeah. Just working out some issues. There were some great ones. And I suppose the Bond girl thing was kind of the place of the actresses in the Hammer films, in terms of they were obviously there to tick the box for glamour, and they did that really well. But some of them were really good as well, as actresses like Veronica Carlson or Barbara Steele was a great presence in things, and crossed over into different modern horror with Shivers for Barbara Steele at least. Mm-hmm. So she kind of straddled both sections. And then there's a whole bunch of other stuff like I suppose the modern horror stuff, the rape revenge movie. You've got Camille Keaton in I Spit on Your Grave. That's maybe the most memorable of those early ones. And Zoe Temerlis in Miss 45, which is the one I think is probably the best. Not a particular fan of rape revenge movies, but I think Miss 45 is a really good one.
Or One Eye.
What's her name? Thriller, A Cruel Picture. What's her name? That's going to torture me until the end of time, unless you can remember it using some kind of magic box.
Oh, I can remember, but I'm just going to mention Patty Shepard, who played the vampire lady in The Werewolf versus the Vampire one.
The Paul Naschy. Yeah.
I'll give that another mention, just because we were talking about women in horror. But yes, that's quite a good role. Yes, not a lot to be done with the role, but yeah. Who was it? You showed?
Christina. Yes, that's it. Yeah, Thriller. I'm a big fan of Thriller, A Cruel Picture. That's really great. And then, of course, you've got the European vampire films like Vampires, spelt wrong, with Marianne Morris and is it Anulka?
Anulka.
And what we did forget, bless you, and what we did forget to mention when we're talking about old people was that away from Joan Crawford and Bette Davis, Britain had their own fantastic, if you will, hag horror kind of spokeswoman, which was Sheila Keith from the Pete Walker films in the 70s.
Oh, yeah.
She was terrifying.
Now, there's something we could probably chuck into Retro Rewind somewhere online.
We should, and any of those would be great choices. If you haven't watched them, Sheila Keith is fantastic. She was already presumably in her 60s, right? At least.
I would have thought she's in her 60s. If not, if she was in her 20s, she aged terribly.
Extremely tough life. But she was kind of the go-to lady for Pete Walker. Was this British low-budget filmmaker of the 70s, made some really good horror movies, the most famous of which is probably Frightmare, and she's a fairly elderly cannibal in that, and she's great in everything though, right up to the comeback and House of Long Shadows, which is the famous team up of Cushing, Lee, Vincent Price, and John Carradine.
Now, as you mentioned, would you say that is famous just for the team up, or would you say the film's actually any good?
Well, I actually really like House of Long Shadows because I think the team up is what makes it something you want to go back to because you get to see Peter Cushing having a bit of a chuckle and Christopher Lee having a good time, Vincent Price making the most ridiculously melodramatic entrance of all time. I have arrived.
I have arrived.
Oh, it's me. It's all about me. But I actually really I think it's a fun, because I quite like old dark house mysteries. Things like The Cat and the Canary, and this is one of those, and it has a twist that makes you go, oh. Yeah, I've got quite a lot of affection for it, but I suppose a lot of that is the fact that it's the only chance you get to see everybody in one film at the same time.
I guess that's true enough.
But yeah, there's tons of them. And so the horror genre has always been, I think, a great gift to actresses that wouldn't have found such interesting and often quite complicated roles in other genres. Your favorite scream queen of all time is still Kirsty, do you think?
Kirsty? Ashley
You're
Lauren.
thirsty? You should get... Oh.
My favorite scream queen? I suppose it's one of them things. It depends. It's a bit like if somebody goes, what's your favorite movie?
What's the scariest thing you've ever watched?
Stephen in the shower. Yikes.
Didn't realize you were there that day.
Yeah, what?
What about Adrienne Barbeau?
Yeah, I guess so. The Fog. Yeah, I suppose so. That's not what you thought I was going to say, was it? You didn't think I was going to say The Fog?
No. That's what you call her. That's fine.
You thought I was going to say Swamp Thing.
You can't call it that. That's really offensive. Oh, you mean the movie? Yeah. The Fog. She's great. Up in that lighthouse with Robert Pattinson and Willem Dafoe.
Yep.
And the seagull.
That's the sequel or the prequel. If we look at it. But
The Fog versus Lighthouse.
Yeah, I think in terms of Scream Queen type of thing, it depends on kind of maybe what you've watched recently. It's one of them things, or like we mentioned the Hammer films, and you mentioned the Giallos and all these other things. Maybe you just have one from each. Like you're taking candy from a shop. I want one of them, and one for there, and one for there.
Yeah,
that's what I'm gonna do. So there.
Oh, fair enough. Oh.
Deal with it.
Fair enough. Like in Countdown.
Yeah.
1 from the top and 5 from anywhere else.
Yep. Exactly. Just like that.
7 vowels.
Yep. I woo. So your favourite is always, no doubt about it, is always just going to be Barbara Steele.
Oh, Barbara Steele is hard to beat, right? I don't mean that literally, if anyone's listening from domestic violence charities. She's fantastic. I don't think anyone had such a quite strange presence on screen as she does. And she's not in those movies very much. Like when I watched Pit and the Pendulum some time ago, she's only in it for a few minutes. A bit like, I suppose, Elsa Lanchester in Bride of Frankenstein. That look that she has and her presence in that movie is so big that you forget she only turns up in what I think is the last 10 minutes, because the whole plot is building to her being created. And she shows up, and then pretty much they pull the convenient lever that makes the whole thing crash down, the whole castle fall to pieces, which I think every home should have.
Yeah, it's just
things are going bad. Christ.
You've
built-in lever.
I would say that's one of the things with women in probably older sort of films is you remember them, but maybe you've watched it years ago and you watch somebody and you remember them being in it a lot longer than what they actually are. Now, one of my favorite films has always been The Wicker Man, not the Nicolas Cage one, but
The Bees.
Yeah, not that one. But you would look at the great cast, and you got Christopher Lee, Ed Woodward, Britt Eklund, who we didn't mention, but Britt Eklund is another person. Ingrid Pitt's in it.
Yes.
But a lot of people forget that she's in it because she's not in it for very much. She's in it for a couple of scenes, but it's enough it's enough for me anyway to go, Ingrid Pitt's in that film.
Yeah.
There is people that stand out, but you would probably remember them being in it longer than you watch it. Go, oh, that was it. It's like I always remember Caroline Munro having a bigger role in Captain Kronos. But then you watch it, and then you go, oh, well, she's got this bit part, really. But
yeah, and it's the same for you always remember Mrs. Voorhees in Friday the 13th, but it's pretty much the last 15 minutes where she turns up and you're like, oh, this is this previously unmentioned and unseen character. That's the killer.
Oh, great, Stephen. I haven't watched it yet. Great way to spoil.
Oh, you haven't watched? Oh, that's fine. Just thought you'd have seen it by now, but that's fair enough. I don't want to spoil it. Did you know that Ginger snaps in that movie?
Ginger snaps.
She snaps. Yeah,
it's another person.
Yeah, she's really good. She's in Hannibal. She's got a great role in Hannibal as Margot, the weird character in one of the subplots. There's a whole bunch that have come out in recent years, not literally, obviously. Like Amanda from the Saw movie, she's really good.
Yep.
She kind of, her character arc ends in 3 because she dies, but she's still a big part of the overall franchise. I think Shawnee Smith, right?
Yeah.
Who's also in the Blob remake, which is fantastic.
Yeah, it's good. I don't know about you, but you'd watch the Saw films, and when I first seen her in the Saw films, I was like, I'm sure I've seen you in something before. And then you watch that's what I've seen.
Yeah. And she appears to be aging backwards because she somehow looks slightly older in the Blob remake in 1988 than she does as Amanda in 2000 and zillion.
She's like Andy Peters and Philip Schofield, which, if people don't know, are children's TV presenters in the UK. They looked whatever age when I was little, and they like, hang on a minute, should you be like 75 by now?
Yeah.
No.
And Philip Schofield still had the same 19-year-old face. He just got like white hair, which he's presumably faking because we know he's gone back in time somehow. Yes. I do like him. Yeah, so no, she's a great one. And Mrs. Voorhees is such a fantastic character in that, and you do forget that she's barely in the film, and in fact she only turns up when it's time to have the big confrontation. I suppose we won't be talking about the Nun in 50 years' time. That's not the greatest female horror villain of all time. I think Julia in Hellraiser has a good shout as the most memorable.
Yeah. It's not a horror film, but I can't remember what the character's name is, but the woman who keeps taking her head off in Return to Oz.
Oh yeah, I haven't seen that for a long time, but I think I remember that's almost a horror film because it's so disturbing.
That's the one. I mean, we had it on a video, and it was always, my sisters would be, I want to watch Wizard of Oz, whereas I was like, I just want to watch Return to Oz. It's sinister and twisted, and it's kind of what I would have thought that kind of world would be like. But Fraser Bulk, that was another person from The Craft.
She's fantastic. Yeah, she's the best thing about The Craft. Yeah, she's great in Return to Oz. I always thought maybe she should have had a better career, although she does pop up in random stuff now and again. Yes. She's part of the Island of Dr. Moreau, the famous one that Richard Stanley walked off or got sacked from. She's a really good actress. There's a whole bunch of them. But decades worth.
Anything else you want to say about women in horror?
Women in horror? That's probably the gist of it. I mean, it's fair. It's probably important to say that if you're looking for a recent film of true greatness directed by a woman, a recent horror film that is directed by a woman, there's a whole bunch of them because, as we said earlier, there's now the outlets, there's now the different services where movies can be seen better, and Hollywood is trying to make up for lost time. And so there's things like, not all from America, actually, there's things like Issa Lopez's Tigers Are Not Afraid from Mexico.
Yeah.
Lynn Ramsey directed We Need to Talk About Kevin, which as far as I'm concerned is basically a realistic version of The Omen. The best rape revenge film I've seen in years was Coralie, I think it's Fagiat's Revenge, which is really gruesome.
Oh, yeah, I really like that.
Very French and just absolutely brilliant. And I'm not usually a fan of rape revenge movies, but that spins it around and also delivers the gore. The French film Raw is really good, directed by Julia Ducournau. So that's I haven't seen it, but there's a lot of love for Girl Walks Home Alone at Midnight by Anna Lily Amirpour, which is meant to be really good, but I haven't got around to watching it just yet. But there's a whole bunch of them. So they're out there. They've always been out there, but now they're out there and people are talking about them more, and we'll still have obviously the large amount of final girls or ballsy heroines that stay standing when all the men have been killed off in the first hour just by getting distracted by a light in the forest.
Well, I would say that I think it's a good thing that more women are being recognised to direct films, because eventually you kind of get, you kind of get stuck in a rut when you're watching a movie and you can tell it's directed by a man by the way certain shots are. When you see something by a woman's done it and you go, there's something, a shot maybe a man wouldn't have thought of doing, for instance. I can't think of anything off the top of my head, but there'd be certain shots when you go, oh, that's clearly a woman's been influencing that shot, or this scene, or whatever, or it's been written by a woman. A certain character has been written by a woman, or whatever. So I think it's a good thing. But like a lot of things, it has its good sides and its downsides. But we should have to see how history plays it out. So,
I think so.
Overall, women in horror, I would say, front of the camera and behind the camera, I'd say it was a good thing.
Of course.
Of course it.
Many great examples.
And of course it must be a good thing, because there's even festivals now for women in horror. In fact, there's one called Women in Horror Film Festival, which is in America. I can't remember whereabouts it is, but I believe it's usually held about this time, actually, about February time.
Yeah.
It's a mixture of feature films and short films directed or written by women. So it's obviously developing something.
Yeah, and I think there's, of course, yeah, absolutely. And I think it's important to say that, I suppose we've seen the difference in terms of, it used to be the cliche that if you went to a horror festival, it would be like about 264 men that still lived with their mothers and 3 girlfriends that came along and presumably were confused. But now you go and it's pretty 50-50.
Not their girlfriend, Stephen. They wasn't their girl.
Oh God, I thought that was a bit glamorous. But now, even you can see the difference even going to the Fright Fest and stuff, where it does seem to be a much more even balance, and it's not just goths that have turned up. It is a mixture of boys and girls.
Boys and girls mixing around.
And the genre hasn't really changed that much. Like, there's a really good book called Blood Money, which is about the kind of business end of the genre and box office and all that kind of stuff, by Richard Norwell. And that talks about how things like Prom Night back in the 80s were very much marketed at women and men, whether it be the kind of side stories and love interest and stuff, or the strong female character that was usually left standing at the end. It was all about how the audience was pretty 50-50, and the films were marketed towards both of them because they knew they had to get both of them to make it a hit. So it makes a lot of financial sense to have strong female characters and stuff in the movies that would appeal to both genders. Although I suppose nowadays it's more than 2 genders.
Well, yeah. So overall, I would say women in horror is a good thing, no matter what, whichever way they are, front and behind of the camera.
Camera, yeah.
We're gonna wrap this up now, Stephen, with letting people know what we're going to be talking about in next episode, which goes live on the 27th of March.
Oh, yeah.
Of course, the obvious things, we'll probably be talking about what we've recently seen, which could be anything from now till then. But, Stephen, if I said I'd want to give you some money, and your name was Mo, what would you say?
I'd say I would like the money, but the thing about money is that I always want Mo.
Wow! Like Mo Rutherford, played by Michael Moriarty in The Stuff, which we talk about.
Oh, yeah.
The Stuff.
What a fantastic link. And I felt part of that as well.
Exactly. Larry Cohen's The Stuff will be talking about in 1985. So that'll be part of our retro rewind, but we won't just talk about that film, will we, Stephen?
Oh, no, we won't just stop at The Stuff, because that'd be ridiculous to stop at The Stuff. We're going to go much further. In fact, we're going to go all the way.
With Larry Cohen.
Yeah, we're literally going to dig him up and penetrate. Oh, Do you mean with the movies? Yeah.
Not that.
Oh, okay. No, fair enough. Apologies to the family.
But yes, that whole episode will be devoted to Larry Cohen.
Yeah. Director of such films as The Stuff.
And Q.
And It's Alive.
And other stuff.
And The Stuff. Actually, the other stuff could have been the sequel name.
More stuff.
Yet more stuff.
The stuffing.
The stuff we didn't give you before. Maybe not that one.
I just want to watch it now, actually. But no. We're going to have to wait, Stephen. We're going to have to wait until next.
No.
So next episode goes live 27th of March. And as I mentioned at the beginning of this, you can now find us on Apple Podcasts as well as all the other potential podcast providers that you can listen to us on. So put that in your diaries, 27th of March. And, that for me, Stephen, that's it. I ain't got nothing else to say.
That's it for me, I think. I'm just going to pop my clothes back on and get to work or something. Actually, I suppose, yeah. And that's me done. I'm spent, completely spent.
Okay, well, we should go bye-byes now then.